Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I'm here for my LCS Round 2 overview and analysis of both of the series. LCS playoffs are definitely a little bit shorter than maybe some of the other regions. There's barely a lower bracket. I mean, there is a lower bracket, but only 6 teams ended up making playoffs, only 4 teams in that upper bracket to start with, and so we're going to be finding out who makes the finals here already in round number 2. Incredibly excited to go over it, but of course, let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. If you want to know what my thoughts are on a lot of these series going into it, maybe what I predicted in both of these series, you can check out my round 1 video. That's going to be up in the iCard right now. You can go ahead and check out the preview section. Of course, I go over all of the round 1 games in that video as well, but at the end, I also do preview both of the series that we're going to be talking about today. So if you want a breakdown of how I think these series are going to go, maybe some of the matchups to look out for, that video is your friend. I'll do a small one at the beginning of each section here, but definitely if you want a more long-form kind of overview of what's going on, that is the video for it. But in this video, we're going to be going over both of the series. We're going to find out who's going to be heading to the finals as our first representative from North America for MSI. And then we will also find out the 2 teams that will be facing off against each other to kind of fight for that last spot next weekend. So I'm really excited to go over that, but let's go ahead and kick it right off. We're going to be starting off with the Winners Finals Series, the upper bracket finals, and it's the 2 teams that we've been waiting to see face off in a best of 5 basically all season long. We had the number 1 seeded Cloud9 taking on the number 2 seeded FlyQuest. These 2 teams have really just easily been the 2 best teams in the LCS so far in 2023, and I think everybody can say that this is the series that they are the most looking forward to. I think a lot of people see these as the 2 big favorites to win it all, and this series is going to give a lot of momentum to whoever is able to win, but this series was a little bit up and down across the regular season. In their first appearance, FlyQuest definitely was able to get the better of Cloud9. They looked like the better team, but that was when FlyQuest was really clicking on all cylinders. They've definitely not been nearly as clinical over the last few weeks, and when they faced off again in the final week of the season, Cloud9 was pretty easily able to best them. Of course, they also played a tiebreaker for that number 1 seed that Cloud9 was able to win in a really fun game, a pretty close back and forth game, but Cloud9 definitely having the edge as of recently, but FlyQuest is one of those teams that you really can't ever count out. Berserker versus Prince is obviously a fantastically fun matchup. Eminence versus Vikla is a blast. Blabber versus Spica was my matchup of the series, my key matchup of the series. There were a lot of things to look at as places to be excited about, you know, when you look at this matchup in particular, but it's going to be whichever team shows up better on the day. They're both ridiculously talented, and they both shown that they have the ability to win. And so if one's having a good day and one's having a bad day, it's likely going to be enough to just swing everything in their favor. I don't really see a massive difference, at least going into this series, between these 2 teams. And so I'm excited. Usually when I say that, it's a quick 3-0, so hopefully I'm wrong here. I'd love a really competitive back and forth fun series, but of course, if you haven't followed this series, what we do here is now go game by game. It's going to be a little bit different than round 1 if you only watch my round 1 video, because there's only 2 series to cover. I'm going to be going game by game with game by game slides up on the screen. So we're going to be kicking it off with game number 1. And the winner of game number 1 was Cloud9. They are able to take the first game and go up into the series 1-0 here. Game 1, obviously pretty important for that momentum factor. You want to be able to get that momentum underneath you going into a series like this. You certainly want to feel the confidence. Confidence, especially when you have 2 teams that are talented, can really be like the separator. We've seen that in pretty much every region across the history of League of Legends, even at Worlds. When a team is just feeling it, they can overcome challenges that maybe teams that aren't feeling it just aren't able to overcome, even if they're not as talented. But Cloud9 looking awesome in this game. A lot of early fights, I would say, early, quote-unquote, like early mid-game, I would say, the 6 to 10 minute mark. Fights around objectives. We saw a fight around Dragon to kind of kick off the game. It was a little bit of a wet noodle fight, but Cloud9 definitely able to take that. But on the flip side, we saw a fight around Rift Herald that FlyQuest was able to win themselves. Unfortunately for Fly, even with, you know, these fights kind of going a little bit back and forth, C9 just did a really good job controlling all of the lanes and controlling the macro. They were up in gold quite a bit just from the pressure that they were able to exert on the map. Tristana was super far ahead this game. The Varus for Berserker was also super far ahead this game, which isn't particularly surprising, but both are worth noting. And so C9 still had a gold lead, and top lane was definitely going in favor of C9. We saw Fudge get a solo kill on Impact. We'll get back to that in a bit because, you know, Impact has had some struggles in lane over the past, you know, year or so, maybe even longer than that, and I definitely don't think that that was not the case in this series, or in this game at the very least. He was not particularly good in this one. But Fly tries to bounce back in the mid-game, you know, some decent macros, some decent fighting, I would say, mostly going on from them. They are skilled players, but C9's just a little bit too far ahead in terms of the gold lead. Eminus really shuts the door on a lot of these engages, and Sven's Heimerdinger is almost impossible to play into here. He just controls the area so well that C9 is just getting, like, all of the objectives, and they establish a pretty strong lead for themselves around 20, 25 minutes into the game. They do go for an end around 22, 23 minutes after a really nice fight on the top side of the map. Unfortunately, they just get a little bit too over-eager, and they end up getting set back a little bit there. It does extend the game out a bit, but C9 kind of calms themselves down. They realize they're still in a power position, and they play a lot more controlled. They take Baron, they go for Soul Point, and they're able to beat FlyQuest in that final fight, and they're able to take the game. My player of the game is going to go to Sven here in game number 1. I think there are a lot of people that I think you could give this to. Eminus had a great game on the Tristana. Blabber was awesome on the Maokai, but I'm going to give it to Sven. I think the zone control coming out from the Heimerdinger was ridiculously valuable, and I think without that, this game is significantly harder for C9 just in general. I think Sven's pressure in lane to be able to get Berserker a lot of gold early into that matchup, as well as just his fantastic team fighting, definitely earns him player of the game. You know, I think I've maybe gained a reputation of being a little bit lower on Sven. I don't think that's necessarily how I actually feel, but I can understand why it may come across like that in my videos with the way that I've talked about it. I think he's a very good support. I just think that, you know, on a team like Cloud9, oftentimes he can get a little bit overshadowed by the amount of talent that is around him. He's been really good in this playoff run, though. He was really good against CLG in round number 1. He was my player of the series in that series, and then, you know, game number 1 here was also really solid for him. Heimerdinger is a pick that this team has gone to quite a bit, and I expect that to continue, but Eminus was also great. He was the main damage dealer here for Cloud9. The Tristana was just super aggro. I love to see Eminus get on something that he can be proactive on, because even in the early game, he was out on the map trying to make plays, trying to initiate skirmishes, and it was working well. C9 was able to gain a lot of tempo from that. And then Blabber, I mean, what a fantastic performance coming out of the Maokai, a massive jungle diff in this game. We'll talk about Spica in a bit, but Blabber just controlled the map basically from moment 1. Other than the Rift Herald fight, I really didn't see a lot of moments where it felt like Blabber was on the back foot really in any capacity, but even the mechanics coming out from the Maokai, obviously that fantastic play where he blocks the full engage with just one Maokai Q was really cool, even if it probably wasn't intentional. But Blabber's just really good. I mean, there's not a lot I can say about that. Fudge gets a solo kill on Impact in the top lane, and the Cassante engages towards the back half were really good. Berserker does the damage on the back lane that he needs to do. Cloud9 just looked really, really solid and complete in this game. They are a group of 5 players that are all incredibly talented. There's a reason they're the #1 seed. As for FlyQuest on the other side, not exactly how you wanted to kick off the series. Done of the game for me is going to go to Ayla. The support gap in this game was just a little bit too big. The recon engages not particularly strong. A lot of people are really questioning why Ayla is still in for FlyQuest, and I understand why you would keep him in maybe for the rest of spring, but if he can't step up and be like an actual contributing factor against a team like Cloud9, no matter how much I liked his tape in Academy, you probably should just go with a player like Winsome, who has proven to be able to work with this team. But I do like the idea of continuing with Ayla, at least for Spring Split. I think you're good enough to be able to hold off, but this was not a great performance from him. I'm going to give him dud of the game, even though I very much wanted to give this to Impact in the top lane. This was 2022 Summer Impact, and that's frustrating, I think, for a lot of us. Not that Impact was like the worst player in the world in 2022. I know I got a lot of criticism for being super down on him in 2022, but the man just died a lot. He got solo killed more than any other top laner in any major region in the entire world, and that was kind of the case. His laning has been questionable over the last, I would say, like 3 or 4 years, but the last year or so has really like amplified that problem where he's just been bad in lane, good in team fights. It felt like that was a little bit better over the course of the regular season, but Fudge really took advantage of him. He's one of the few top laners in the league that I think has the skill to actually be able to take advantage of some of the mistakes that Impact is making, and Impact just didn't have any real pressure at all on the map. Not a good Renekton game. Spica got completely out jungled. Some of those engages on Wukong were just bad. He was caught out multiple times where he had to use his only dash in order to escape. It's just never good. Vikla and Prince were fine. I think people are going to criticize Vikla for building Crown, but you shouldn't need damage on Victor for this team, right? Like with Renekton, Wukong, Zeri, like, you shouldn't need to build full damage on the Victor in order to be efficient this game. It's just unfortunate that he was the only one who had any gold going in towards the back half, but he had some really good positioning. I would say plays overall. That hold that they did around 23, 24 minutes, Vikla played pretty out of his mind in that engage, and so, you know, I'm not going to criticize him too much. He was the best player on FlyQuest in this game, and then Prince was fine. Didn't really have a lot to do in this game, was just kind of picking like a scaling matchup into Varus Heimerdinger, which is just, it's not going to be easy in lane. You just got to hope that the rest of your team can survive so that you can hit a point in the game where you can win, but they just weren't able to do that. They took, a Victor Zeri comp and they tried to pressure a little bit too early, and Cloud9 was able to generate a nice gold lead because of that. Overall, the series is far from over. I wouldn't be surprised if FlyQuest could bounce back, but C9 definitely taking a commanding 1-0 start in this series. Blabber, Eminus, Sven in particular, looking really, really good in this game. If they can keep up that momentum, this is going to be a classic Cloud9 sweep, like they've shown a lot across springs in recent years. As for FlyQuest, it's easy to turn it around. You just got to play to your win condition a bit more. If you're going to pick Victor Zeri, just play a little bit more for scaling, play a little bit more towards the end game. But honestly, I like the plays that you're making early. Just pick champions that can kind of enable those plays rather than just kind of hoping you can get to the team fight phase of the game. But it's definitely going to be interesting, and Game 2 is absolutely massive. You certainly don't want to go down 2-0 against Cloud9. You don't want to be expected to win 2 games in a row against a Cloud9 team that is really, really good. Or 3 games in a row, I should say, against the Cloud9 team that is really good. So are they going to be able to kind of fight back and, make this a series at 1-1, or is Cloud9 going to be taking a commanding lead in this series going up 2-0? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Cloud9. They are able to take game number 2 and take a pretty commanding lead in this series, going up 2-0. You definitely don't want to be down 0-2 to a team like Cloud9, but that's unfortunately the circumstance that FlyQuest has fallen into here. I talked about this a bit in the small preview at the beginning, but you certainly don't want to be on an off day in the playoffs against a team like Cloud9 that really can just run through you if you're not playing all that well. And unfortunately, it feels like FlyQuest is on an off day. This is not a very good showing from a team that has had much better performances in a lot of other circumstances. I know a lot of people are going to say that this was, expected, that FlyQuest is awful and they're definitely not a top 2 team and they're nowhere close, because that's just how LCS analysis works, is everybody overreacts to everything that ends up happening. But I think generally FlyQuest is still a really, really good team that just, Cloud9's better, right? And I think we're kind of seeing that. Cloud9's doing a good job taking advantage of a lot of the weaknesses, I should say, that FlyQuest is kind of putting out there. So let's go ahead and talk about what happened this game. Sven and Berserker honestly are just too good as a duo. It's really becoming a problem. We're going to talk about Ayla. I'm going to be a little bit different in terms of the conversation around Ayla than maybe some of the other analysts or the community or everybody in general out there. I know that there's a lot of negativity surrounding Ayla, and trust me, I'll get to that, but Berserker and Sven deserve a lot of credit as well. I think they're really strong in lane. That's going to be the big advantage that they've offered over a lot of the other bot lanes. Not to say they're bad out of lane, right? But just that their big advantage is how much better they are than a team like FlyQuest early on in games. Prince is somebody who does like to scale up and try to skirmish in the mid game, but that's not really going to be possible if Cloud9 invests a lot into the bot lane. This is exactly what we saw teams were doing against FlyQuest throughout the back half of the regular season. Teams were investing a lot into making sure that Prince can't really get to the point where he can be even in the mid game, because when he's even in the mid game, he's ahead, because he's just a great team fighter, right? He's able to do a lot with that, but teams are making sure that he doesn't get to that point, that their AD carry can get strong, and Cloud9 was definitely willing to do that. Spica tries to get a little bit back bot. They're able to pick up a kill onto Sven, but unfortunately, Blabber with a really smart counter gank here on the Maokai, he's able to get a ton of gold onto this Varus, and I think he's sitting on either 2-0-1 or 3-0 at 6 minutes into the game, and from that point onwards, you just cannot play that bot lane anymore. It is completely over. Impact gets caught in the top lane again. Another good gank by Blabber. He's had a really good series so far. Sven does get caught from a nice engage from Ayla and Prince in the mid game, right in the mid lane, I should say, in the mid game. I guess it's both are applicable here, but FlyQuest continues to be relatively interesting. A good dragon fight for them. Spica, I think, plays it pretty beautifully. They wait until Blabber fully engages to fully target him. Spica kind of dipping and diving out, tanking a lot, but also making sure that he's healthy enough to go back in and get the dragon, which he's able to do. He's able to secure it after Blabber dies, and he's able to get out, and FlyQuest, I think, ends up winning the fight 2-1 and getting dragon, which is really good considering the stage of the game that they were actually in, but unfortunately, it's just the positioning towards the back half of the game that really becomes a nightmare for them. Ayla gets a little bit too aggressive with some of those engages, and Vikla in particular towards the back half of this game was just positioned so poorly. A lot of flanking Vygar plays. I don't know why that was so difficult for me to say. A lot of flanking Vygar plays that he just wasn't able to capitalize on. He gets caught out really easily, and these fights end up becoming 4v5s or even 3v5s with Ayla kind of going in a little bit too early to try and save Vikla, and they just don't end up working out. And so Cloud9, generally speaking, I thought had a good game. I think that a lot of the conversation surrounding this has certainly been on FlyQuest rather than Cloud9. I think that is unfair. I think generally speaking, if people know me and they watch the channel, they know that I'm going to focus on the things that teams do well rather than the things that teams do awfully, because I think that there is just too much negativity in the community in general, and I think Cloud9's not getting their praises sung enough. Like, yes, FlyQuest played the game bad, but Cloud9 still did a really good job, and I hate that the conversation is entirely predicated around X team is bad rather than, Y team is good. And so I'm going to do that a bit more here. I'm going to talk about how Cloud9 just played really well. Berserker's going to get player of the game. He was awesome. I mean, he got super fed in the early game, but those arrows in the back half were awesome. His positioning is just so good throughout the entirety of the game. He knows when he needs to be aggressive. He knows when he needs to be a little bit more passive because the team is going to be looking for him. He just has a really good game sense for where he needs to be at all points in time. I totally understand why a lot of people see him as an MVP favorite, and I certainly can't, disagree with that take in general, even if it's not my pick. It's hard for me to sit there and tell you that you're wrong for having that opinion. I think Berserker is really, really fun. He's a really good player, and obviously he's kind of really come out of his shell. I think you can make a really strong argument he's the best player in the LCS, but also Sven was really good. Those silences on Soraka, absolutely massive. I feel like I say this every time, but every time Soraka is picked, it's just like, why is this champion not picked more? I have yet to see a circumstance where Soraka genuinely feels useless in a pro game. She is often winning lane, she's often giving a lot of prio, and she's often being in a position where she's super useful in the mid to late game. And so the Soraka continues to be used at a high level, especially by good teams like Cloud9, and Blabber just continues to be awesome. The dude is everywhere on the map in the early game. Player of the game is Berserker, but man, I was super close to giving it to Blabber. I think he's been a huge X factor for Cloud9 in this series. Eminus was fine, Fudge was good in the top lane. There really wasn't a lot going on in the solo lanes. This really was just about getting the bot lane ahead and then eventually getting to the point in the game where you are getting a front-to-back 5v5 team fight that the Varus can actually just take over. You were finding picks on the Vigar, and you were able to kind of just snowball the game out of control from there. As for FlyQuest on the other side, like I said, dud of the game is going to go to Ayla, but I just feel really bad for Ayla. I know the conversation's going to be like, God, this guy's dog shit, get him out of there, blah, blah, blah. Because that's what, LoL fans do, is they just sit there and they yell at players. But obviously, in a grand scheme of things, I feel bad for him with the situation that he's kind of been presented. Joining a team mid-split is hard. It is not an easy thing to do. Eminus on the other side made it look a little bit easy, but he's also had some ups and downs. I think trying to get into a circumstance where a team is dominating and trying to continue that dominance while also trying to figure out what, the communication patterns are, trying to fit in with the ecosystem and the culture that has been established because the team has already played half of their season. That's not easy to do, right? I understand why they wanted to go with Ayla, but I think they definitely put him in a position where, he was kind of set up to fail, if I'm being entirely honest, in this circumstance, no matter how good of a player he was. He's going to get done of the game because he wasn't very good, but I do want to reinforce this idea that Winsome being in this game does not win it for FlyQuest. I've seen that a lot. I've seen a lot of people be like, if they had Winsome in this game, they win. What? What? Clearly, we're not on the same page. Ayla was a problem, but there were a lot of things that went wrong in this game. Ayla being in the game did not cause Vikla to go on this mighty roam towards the backline of a dragon fight in order to get picked off immediately. Ayla being in the game did not mean Spica got overextended and caught in a trade bot lane level 1. Ayla in the game did not mean that Impact was going to get 2v1'd in the top lane and give over all pressure to Cassante. There are problems that Ayla has, but FlyQuest has bigger issues than just one player. And that's the kind of mentality, in my opinion, that has held LCS teams in particular back for such a long time. They get so short-sighted when it comes to what their quote-unquote problems are that they fail to see, the big picture of what the issues actually end up being. Yes, Ayla is a problem. I'm not trying to sit here and say that he was good in this game or anything like that, but if you just put all the blame on Ayla, you are actively ignoring a lot of the things that this team is not doing well outside of him, and then you get to the point where Winsome comes in and this team is still not winning. And so hopefully they're able to figure out a lot of what's going on here, because it really does feel just like mental lapses. Feels like they're getting completely out-macroed by Cloud9, and everything outside of the mid-game has been a disaster for FlyQuest. So hopefully they're able to pick that up. Prince needs to get online. This team needs to do whatever they can to get Prince into a situation where he can actually teamfight from even in the mid-game, because if he can do that, he can win you games. They did it so much in the regular season, but they've honestly just stopped investing in him in the early game, and I think it's really hurt them a lot. But I mean, it's do or die for FlyQuest. Obviously, you're not eliminated if you lose this series, but C9's going to be taking this in a pretty clean sweep if you do not get your act together in this game number 3. But for C9, just keep the train rolling. If you can generate an early lead again, like you've done in both of the first 2 games, you're probably just going to win. FlyQuest doesn't have a lot of tools to be able to pull themselves out of that. For FlyQuest, you simply have to be able to survive. These are 2 late game comps that you're going for. I get that Jax Sejuani is a good combo. I get that Prince is really good on Zeri, but if you continue to let Cloud9 get the early game advantage every single game, it is going to be completely doomed for you. And so that's what I need to see out of Fly. For C9, just don't change anything. You've got the pattern. Just keep sticking to it. But is C9 going to be able to close it out and win this series in a clean 3-0 sweep, or is FlyQuest going to at least be able to take 1 here in game number 3? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Cloud9. They are able to take game number 3, and they're able to shut the door and bring out the broom for this clean sweep in upper bracket finals. A dominant series coming out from this C9 team, and honestly, like, it's just impressive. I think we can talk about this game a little bit differently than maybe we talked about the first 2, because this one was definitely not as clean from Cloud9. I would say it was probably their least clean game of the series, but at the very least, this team is now walking away from the series, dominating FlyQuest, the only other team that a lot of people thought that they were going to have trouble with in the playoffs. C9 could be walking their way to a title, and I wouldn't really be all that surprised. They look so good right now. But let's go ahead and talk about what ended up happening in this game. Some action early on. FlyQuest tries to get some, I guess, aggression up in the top side, trying to shut down this Renekton. Spica really wants to make a play on here, but Fudge just outplays them. Like, he is simply just better, and so he ends up surviving under tower. But Vikla somehow just doesn't pay attention to his minimap. Maybe the comms are too flooded with everything Impact and Spica are doing, but Vikla, I guess, just doesn't see that Blapper has come to gank him. He has to run into the enemy jungle, and he just kind of dies for free to Eminus, which is huge for Cloud9 to be able to pick up the first blood on him there. And let me tell you, it was not a good day for Vikla after that. I mean, dying when you have vision, very questionably like that. It's certainly not the first time this split we've seen that happen. Not only to Vikla, just to players in the LCS, and it's always questionable. Like, it is never something that I expect. But Ayla and Prince actually play the early game really well. I have that written in my notes here, and I would stand by that. I think Jinx Thresh into Aphelios Braum should be a win. Obviously, Jinx should be able to pressure that lane, but Aphelios is not in a position where he should get, like, dominated in that lane. I just think Prince and Ayla actually did a really good job in the laning phase, but there was a big fight around Baron, or, I'm sorry, Herald, too early in the game for Baron, but there was a big fight around Herald that both teams really wanted to commit to, and this is where the Sylas really starts to get ridiculously fed. Eminus was a massive problem in the early game here, and this is really where it kind of capitalizes. Eminus uses the enemy's ults so ridiculously well, no matter really who they are, whether it's Maokai, whether it's the Tristan ult, whether it's Sion ult, like, he's got a lot at his disposal to be able to use in these early fights, and he uses them at such a high level that it's actually very difficult to deal with him. Obviously, Sylas, as a champion, has a lot of tools that, you know, can kind of make him really difficult to deal with outside of that as well, but Eminus gets incredibly strong in the early game here, but this is where C9's problems start to arise. Now, it's not like the only part of the game they struggle in, but this is where it kind of starts. They get a little bit overextended in the mid lane. FlyQuest is able to capitalize, and they're able to equalize the gold, and now all of a sudden that big Sylas lead you were able to generate, it's just not there anymore, because Prince actually has a lot of gold on the Jinx as well from the early game in the bot lane. And so now you're kind of looking at this part of the map where it's like, okay, Prince finally has gold. There's finally an opportunity for him to be able to play in the mid game. Unfortunately, Berserker's just too good. Like, there really is nothing else to say. Berserker kind of proving in this series that he's probably the most talented player in the LCS. He's just awesome. He's so ridiculous. Even from behind, the Aphelios was doing so much damage. He ends up getting a solo kill onto Prince in the mid lane, which is just absurd considering how much gold Prince had at that point in the game compared to Berserker. And then from that point onward, C9 is just kind of winning every single fight. Berserker could legit 1v9 if he had to. I thought there were some really good plays by Ayla on Thresh to try and save the game. Some great engages, some great hooks, some great disengages, but Berserker could probably legit 1v9 at this point in the game if he really needed to. Unfortunately, we do run into some problems with Cloud9 towards the back half, and this is where I'm going to start to get a little bit critical of them. Their macro got real bad in this game. Like, it was just, like, brainless, if I'm being entirely honest. Berserker gets caught in the bot lane for no reason. Like, he's just down there for no reason. There is no excuse. He's just pushing bot lane with no vision. He ends up getting caught out. The entire team collapses on him, rightfully so, and Eminus tries to TP in to try and salvage it, but he dies as well, and now FlyQuest gets a free dragon to delay Soul Point a little bit longer, but even in that fight, Cloud9 decides to stick around. It's a 3v5, and they have none of their damage dealers. It's Renekton, Sejuani, Braum trying to take on all of FlyQuest, and clearly they get completely chunked out. It's just moronic gameplay from Cloud9. Like, this is the worst stretch I think either team had across all 3 games. Like, there is no explanation for what could have been going on in these calls. This was so greedy. It was so unbelievable. And luckily, they weren't punished for it, right? Like, I mean, yes, they were punished in the fact that they gave up Dragon and they ended up losing 2 kills and their entire team got punished out, but there really wasn't a lot that FlyQuest could get on the map outside of that because the game was already so much in favor of C9, but, like, you do that at an international level where you're not nearly as ahead going into the late game, like, that's a disastrous play. Like, that is a game-losing play 99% of the time. It really was terrible. Spica actually tries to make him pay for it. He ends up stealing Baron on the next engage, but FlyQuest ends up losing the subsequent fight. They lose the Baron buffs, and Cloud9's just able to march it down. Not a clean game. I mean, honestly, props to FlyQuest. I think they actually did a pretty good job trying to rebound from what was a really shitty, like, start to the game from them. And that was just kind of a theme over the course of this series. If you want to give Cloud9 props for something, they consistently made a lot of good plays in the early game. Eminus and Blabber, in particular, were really, really good in the early games in games 1 and 3. Game 2 was really good for Blabber as well. And I think just generally speaking, it was a great series from Blabber, but the early games are really what set Cloud9 apart, but the mid games were really questionable, even in their wins, and man, the late game in Game 3 was just not good, so definitely question marks, but mechanical skill triumphs here. Berserker's gonna get player of the game, because the damage he was doing on the Aphelios was more than enough to get him player of the game. Realistically, I wanted to give this to Eminus. I think Blabber also kind of deserves it, but I would be kind of hypocritical if I didn't give this one to Berserker. I just think he was really, really solid, outside of the random catch that he had in the bot lanes. Ven was good on the Braum, but Eminus and Blabber were also phenomenal in this one. Basically, everywhere they needed to be, Eminus completely took over the early game, and Blabber did a good job in the mid to late game. Some awful calls towards the back half, but I'm not entirely sure that's just him making the call. Whoever it was, I'm going to blame, but overall, I would say for most of the game, Cloud9 looked fine. It was just that general end half of the game that was pretty atrocious, but this team still looks better than almost everybody else in the LCS. Well, I should say everyone else in the LCS, and they're going to be moving on to finals. This punches their ticket to finals. FlyQuest, not so much. They are now going to have to play through lower bracket, being able to take on the team that we talk about later on in the video. Whoever wins the series we talk about later on in the video. But for Fly, this series exposed a lot of the problems that you end up having. I mean, your early laning phase was atrocious across all of these series. The only player that had any sort of relevance in the early game was Spica, and even then, he was just outplayed by Blabber, so there really wasn't a lot of room for FlyQuest to actually operate. Impact is one of, I don't want to say one of the worst laners, but he got exposed by one of the best laners in the league. Vikla was just playing with his brain off, especially in games 2 and 3. And Prince and Ayla were not able to survive these matchups that, quite frankly, were kind of not all that good for them. I mean, the one time they were given a matchup that they could actually play out, they did pretty decent in the early game, but then their mid game fell apart. And so, I don't really know. Like, there's a lot of problems with FlyQuest. I think if you can figure out what you're doing in the early game, a lot of these are going to be a lot easier, but even just capitalizing on some of the mistakes that the enemy team is making in the mid to late game a little bit more efficiently, I think is going to be a positive. We are going to forget, because Cloud9 did dominate the series, but FlyQuest won a lot of fights around 15 minutes. I think they won a fight around 15 minutes in all 3 games this series. Like, they know how to take good fights, and they're good enough in the mid game to be able to capitalize on it, but not playing from a deficit is going to completely change the outlook of this team and essentially just how they play in general. But they're going to have to do it in lower bracket. They are not confirmed for MSI by any means. They'll be taking on the winner of EG and Golden Guardians that we'll talk about in just a second, but this was not a great showing. Luckily, at least the things that they need to clean up are fixable, but like I said, for Cloud9, great series from them. I just want to see a little bit more cleanness coming out from this team, and I really do think that they could be a threat to actually be a little bit of a surprise team at MSI. But that's going to go ahead and bring us to our second series of the video here, our lower bracket series. And this one has, you know, a few more stakes. Obviously, the first series was important because we learned that Cloud9 was now going to MSI, but FlyQuest isn't eliminated by losing it. On the contrary, whoever loses this series is officially eliminated in the playoffs and does not have a chance to compete for the right to go to MSI later on this year. And so this is a big one for both of these teams, both of which I think definitely climbed some mountains to get here. It's a matchup between the number 5 seeded Evil Geniuses and the number 6 seeded Golden Guardians. 5 and 6 seeds making it out of the lower bracket round number 1. I don't think that's ever happened before. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the bottom 2 seeds winning in lower bracket. I don't think has happened in LCS history at the very least, so really good to see it. Evil Geniuses overcoming CLG to be able to get here. That one was a little bit predictable. I think a lot of people saw EG as a better team than CLG going into the playoffs. They just had really underperformed in recent weeks. It felt like when they got sick in that final week, a lot of things really started to fall apart. The inconsistency that came with this team being very feast or famine definitely played into that as well. But generally speaking, the talent level on this team is top 3 for sure. And I think when they're playing on a good day, they are right there. Inspired had a good year. FBI and Vulcan were pretty consistent as well. It was just the soul laners that were a little up and down. Someday wasn't necessarily a problem, just not necessarily a big, driving force. And JoJo had some miserable games this split. He had some really good ones as well, but he had a lot of games where he was just completely running it down. The death total was out of this world for JoJo. And so definitely, a little bit feast or famine for EG depending on who shows up, but they are an incredibly talented team when they are playing at their best. And then Golden Guardians on the other side, talk about a roller coaster of emotions for this organization. They were predicted to be pretty much unanimously 8th going into the split by pretty much every analyst I could see, including me. And they really didn't look all that good at the start of the year. Gory wasn't in for week 1, but even when he did come in week 2, this team didn't look all that great. They started 0-4. Licorice was getting obliterated in the top lane, and we're like, it's okay. You know what? They're just not a very good team. It's okay. Nobody was really expecting them to be great. And then they went on this 7-game win streak that absolutely torched everybody in the league. They were beating everyone, not just bad teams, but good teams as well. They beat EG. They beat Cloud9 during that stretch. They were just beating everybody in sight, and they looked great. And then they collapsed again towards the back half of the year, only winning 2, I think, of their last, I think it was 9. I think they won 2 of their last 9 or 7 or something like that. It's something bad. It's something not very good. They ended the season really, really poorly, and it felt like this team kind of fell back down to earth. I'm not exactly sure what exactly changed for this team. But what I do know is that a lot of the players that were really playing well up until that point, maybe overperforming, players like Stixay and players like Licorice, weren't exactly all that great. And so, very similar to Evil Geniuses, it kind of depends on the version of the team that's showing up here today. Golden Guardians was really good in round number 1. They took down 100 Thieves, which I never saw coming. That was a legitimate upset, and I'm really proud of this team for being able to do it. Stixay and Huhi were phenomenal in that series, and Licorice I thought was significantly better than he had been in previous weeks. If River and Gory can kind of join that party, Golden Guardians is not a team that is going to go down easily. There is a reason that they went on a 7-game win streak, but Evil Geniuses talent-wise was my prediction in this series because, quite frankly, they should be the better team. But what ended up happening? Well, of course, we're going game by game, starting with game number 1. And game number 1 was a Golden Guardians win. They jump out to an early 1-0 lead in the series here, and that's huge for this team. Momentum's always going to be great, but for a team like Golden Guardians that has struggled with momentum over the course of the split, being able to show that, hey, we're not a team you can take lightly, you should have taken us seriously in game number 1, it's just a good sign. And the way they did it, I think, was really impressive. Now, it wasn't perfect. I will say that there were definitely moments where EG was playing good, and I would say they had the advantage in the early part of the game, but Golden Guardians doing a great job in the mid-game to be able to claw their way back. This was actually kind of similar to Cloud9 FlyQuest, especially in game 3, except this time the team that lost the early game actually found a way to be able to make it work. First blood did go to Golden Guardians. It went to top side here. Licorice was able to get it onto Someday. It was off of a really nice gank from River, but some really good plays coming out from JoJo Pune in the mid lane. He was honestly just better than Gory in a lot of the laning phase. Tristana should have a lot of push on the Talia. She's going to be a lot more active, but it was a really good laning phase overall for JoJo, and EG was able to develop quite a bit of a lead, just being able to kind of outlane a lot of their opponents, maybe everywhere outside of the top lane, a little bit in the bot lane as well, like the Caitlyn was strong, but EG was actually in a pretty decent spot moving out of the early game, but they started playing really, really safe. They were moving around the map, and they were getting towers, and they were getting gold, and they were up 3K, I think, at 13 or so minutes into the game, but they're playing really safe. No fights, no engages, and you look at the enemy team, you see a Fiora, you see a Talia, you see a Wukong. They have many ways to be able to scale, and so you do kind of want to maybe get a move on, every once in a while, and the problems that the worries, I guess you should say, that Evil Geniuses fans probably had going into that mid-game of them being a little bit too passive definitely came to fruition with that third dragon fight, which is all just completely disastrous for Evil Geniuses. It completely takes their lead and throws it out the window. They get 4-0'd in that fight and then immediately give over not only Dragon, but Baron as well. Well, not Dragon. They get Dragon in the fight, but they give over Baron as well, which is disastrous. And then Golden Guardians has basically full control, but then it's Golden Guardians' turn to completely slow down the game. And now a lot of this is EG just playing ridiculously safe, not not really, contesting a lot, just kind of allowing GG to do whatever they want, but game really slows down. Big fight for GG around that second Baron. That's how long we have to wait for the next action, but Licorice just completely zones out FBI in that big second Baron fight. The Jinx can't get any damage out, and Evil Geniuses is kind of screwed because they don't really have enough damage with just the Tristana, especially with the lockdown coming in from the Wukong, and then the Heimerdinger actually being really, really useful. GG's able to get an ace later in the game and just end it there, but overall, kind of a slow game, much slower than I anticipated from both of these teams. River's going to get my player of the game because I think his action was pretty good, but again, I would have hoped to see this team be a little bit more aggro in the last half of the game, especially once they got that first Baron. I think they were a little bit worried that EG was going to be able to take like a big pick fight if they weren't careful, but I mean, look at the comp. Like, you have plenty of tools to be able to engage and kind of force something if you really need to, especially with Baron buff, and it felt like Golden Guardians just wasn't really willing to pull the trigger in the mid game. Either way, River was really good when they did end up pulling the trigger. I think you can give a lot of credit to Stixxay as well. A lot of damage coming out from the Caitlyn, but generally speaking, it was the Wukong that I think was creating a lot of the advantages. Good game from Licorice. She was just simply better than Someday in the top lane, and that's going to be a huge matchup here for both of these teams. Both, I would say, don't rely on their top laners at all, and so if one top can generate like a consistent lead over the other, I think that's going to really push the series in one particular direction. But Golden Guardians not really making a lot of mistakes. EG was playing really safe, and big reason for that was Golden Guardians wasn't giving them easy opportunities to take advantage of, and so pretty decent game one from them. As for Evil Geniuses, you were in a decent position at the early part of this game. I mean, you look at like Maokai, Jinx, Tristana, like you should be able to translate a lead into the mid game. Unfortunately, that dragon fight was really just disastrous from them. It basically threw the entire lead. They were lucky to be able to really rebound at all from there. Them playing super passive in the early game definitely came back to bite them. My dud of the game is going to go to Someday. I thought he was the most actively bad in lane when it came to Evil Geniuses. Licorice just had full pressure in that lane. Obviously, the early kill helps, but I don't think Someday's really been all that dominant in lane this year, and I think that's frustrating because that's kind of his hallmark, or that was his hallmark for a lot of years on 100 Thieves. Obviously, he's a phenomenal team fighter as well, and that's why I love him as a player, but he really was clapping some fools in lane for a long time here in the LCS, and that hasn't really shown up in 2023. Inspired, I think, could have been a lot more active. Vulcan, I think, was a little bit too far forward, but the player that I do want to give a shout out to playing at least relatively well in this one was actually Jojo Pune. He did a good job being able to generate a lead in the mid game onto Gory. That was my matchup of the series going into EG versus GG, was Jojo versus Gory. I thought if Jojo had a good series, if he was able to go toe-to-toe with Gory, that this was actually going to be pretty EG favored. He's kind of been the barometer for what EG is able to do, and unfortunately, that just wasn't the case here. They really weren't able to kind of break the game open, but I thought Jojo was fine, and I think Tristana is a generally good pick for this team. But overall, EG definitely has some things they need to work on. I want to see them be more aggressive. I want to see them be more active, I would say, in the mid game. I want to see them be able to generate a lead and then actually do something with it. And kind of similar for Golden Guardians, I think you're lucky to be able to have walked out of this game with a win as easily as you did. I don't think it was unwinnable by any means, but losing in the early game here just wasn't a particularly good strategy when you have Caitlyn Heimerdinger and you don't really play towards it. I didn't really like the ideas, and I don't think either team really looked all that great in game number one, if I'm being entirely honest. So game number two is going to be big for hopefully one team to kind of prove that they are, improving, I would say, having a good series. I think that Golden Guardians definitely can do it, especially if they work on that early game, and if Evil Geniuses can convert a lot of their leads, they can do that as well, but it is kind of a must-win for EG. You do not want to go down 2-0 in the playoffs. So are they going to be able to do it, or is Golden Guardians going to be able to very much take control of everything in this series? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Golden Guardians. They are able to take game number 2 here and take a commanding lead in this series, going up 2-0. Not what I expected at all. Evil Geniuses has not shown up today even a little bit. This game was definitely better than the first for GG, even though they won both games. I would say this one was significantly more controlling. This just felt like a dominating game from them. They basically did everything they needed to do, and it absolutely started in draft. I usually don't talk about draft too much on this channel, as you guys know, but this is a really good draft, and it's really hard to deal with. It's not Evil Genius' fault that they gave this up. It's just a really smart draft ideology from Golden Guardians. The triple flex, basically, or at least the double flex that ended up turning into a triple flex. So you have the Cassante, you have the Tristana, and Evil Genius' draft as if those are going to be your solo laners, as if Licorice is going to be taking the Cassante, so they go for the Scion because they know they're going to be able to scale up. And as if Gory's going to be taking the Tristana, so you go for something like Ahri to create some early pressure as well. You're not going to worry too much about the Zeri in the bot lane because whatever they end up taking in that last pick isn't going to be able to, totally destroy here, especially with something like the Rel on R4, and so you're feeling pretty good. But the Gwen R5, like, just completely changes everything here. Adds the AP that you need to your team alongside the Maokai, of course, but K'Sante mid is a really difficult thing to deal with for something like Ahri because she just can't burst him down. Like, there is no circumstance in which she's ever going to have pressure in that lane. And then Tristana Rell into Nautilus Zeri is actually super Golden Guardians favored in this game, and honestly, they just played this really, really well. It's really impressive what they were able to do in draft, and it really set them up to have a nice early game, and they capitalized on it. Stixxay is obviously no stranger to Tristana, you know, the classic, the famous Tristana, if you will, from back in the CLG days, on that big championship run in spring of, what was it, 2015? When he pulled out the Rageblade Tristana, when that was just a completely garbage build that no one was even going for to win the LCS. Good to see him back on that champion. Not exactly a bot laner for quite a long time in pro, but, you know, good to see this matchup. I do think it was very favorable here, but my player of the game simply has to go to Huhi. We'll get to him, like, really in a bit, but golly, his engages were just so good towards the back half of the game. But what ended up happening in this game? What was the timeline of events? Well, First Blood ends up going to Golden Guardians bot lane. Vulcan gets caught trying to get vision early as the Nautilus, perfectly timed by River to be able to make his way down there to kind of just completely ambush Vulcan in that bush at level 3, and it's just doomed. There's no way he gets out of that. So First Blood going over to Golden Guardians, and then another really good gank mid lane for Gory to be able to get him kind of on the board. You're trying to get him, you know, moving forward. You're trying to get JoJo set behind, because that really is going to be a big problem for Evil Geniuses. A really bad fight in River at 10 to give Golden Guardians a big win for Evil Geniuses. You would have hoped that they would have been able to skirmish a little bit better in the early game, but look at this comp. If the Vi gets behind, you have no reliable way of actually setting up any sort of damage, and the Zeri is not going to be nearly as strong as the Tristana by the time they end up going for this fight at 10 minutes. They do try and dive Licorice in the top lane, and it does go well, but as a response, Golden Guardians just says, well, we're just going to kill your AD carry over and over again. So they just keep targeting FBI. EG tries to get Gory as a response to that, but he's just simply too strong. He does go down, but they end up having to trade one to even get that kill in the first place. So not a lot of good going on for Evil Geniuses. We hit about the 20-25 minute mark, and GG just has full control of the map. They end up, or EG ends up feeling like they have to force something, so they keep going after Licorice. It's the only member of Golden Guardians they can kill, but they have to give up so much pressure to do it, and then Huhi just absolutely shuts the door with two phenomenal engages, one around Baron to be able to secure that for Golden Guardians, and then one in the bot lane in a 3v5 to just be able to end the game right then and there. Like I said, Huhi is player of the game. Those engages on Rell were massive, and honestly, he's just been great for this team. I don't think it's a controversial opinion at this point to say that Huhi has been the best player on Golden Guardians, in my opinion. That's not what the broadcast will tell you. Certainly, that's not what people in the LCS seem to think, because we saw the top 5 MVP vote getters, and Gory was right there in that top 5. But to me, Huhi has been the most valuable player on Golden Guardians. There was a reason I had him as the #1 support in the LCS this split, and it's because I really do think that, you know, if you take Huhi off of this team and replace him with an average, like, support, I think they do significantly worse as a roster. I think he's added the most amount of wins of anybody on this team, and I think he definitely deserves more recognition than he's actually getting. But Stixxay was good here too on the Tristana. River was awesome. He was everywhere he needed to be, and man, Gory plays a really good K'Sante. Poor Licorice was kind of the target of everything EG was doing, but hey, you know, if dying twice means that the rest of your team can get everything on the map, absolutely, sign me up. Like, I'll take that any day of the week. And so Golden Guardians playing really well, and a really dominating victory from them here in game 2. And then for EG, this is bad. Like, this is not good. You now have to win 3 games in a row to keep your split alive against Golden Guardians to even have a chance to be able to play for the shot to go to MSI, which, you know, Evil Geniuses probably was looking forward to at the beginning of this split, but it just did not go well. This was not a very good game. Poor FBI was such a victim. In this one, he's going to get my dud of the game because, I mean, Golden Guardians was just killing him over and over again. They were diving, you know, over and over again. The team basically abandoned him. Like, Vulcan was nowhere near to try and peel and keep FBI safe, which I don't really understand. The entire team was just full engaging. You had Inspired ulting Stixxay on the backline. He just buffered it by jumping away. You had JoJo trying to dive and assassinate. You had Someday ulting in. And even Vulcan was queuing in most of the time. And it's like, where's the peel for FBI? There was none. So he ended up dying first in a lot of these fights. But still, his lack of impact on the game was definitely noticeable and probably the biggest negative towards EG, but realistically, you could give this to everyone. Like, Vulcan, I think, really deserves this. I think he had a miserable game, massive support gap in this one for me. I think JoJo really didn't play all that well, but like, how much is he really going to be able to do? The Vi got behind, she really had no impact. Someday really wasn't doing anything in the top lane. Like, realistically, I think this entire Evil Geniuses team deserves dud of the game. There really was no moments where it felt like they really had pressure. Like, yes, they were picking up kills here or there. I mean, not really that many, just really licorice in the end, but in that one pick on Gory. But outside of that, like, it was just doomed. Every team fight went entirely in favor of Golden Guardians, and there really was just nothing that you could do in this game once you lost early so hard. This is a demoralizing loss. I'm not exactly sure how well they're going to bounce back from this. Like, I'm concerned with what this team is going to do going into game number 3. This has been a team that has been very feast or famine, like I said earlier, but when they're momentum based. If they're not playing well, they're not going to just suddenly get better, especially on the same day. That has been proven over the course of the split so far. So, gonna be interesting to see what happens, but, you know, I would not be surprised if the series ends pretty quick for Evil Geniuses. But for Golden Guardians, man, you really showed up here today. This is the best version of the team. This is the version of the team that won 7 games in a row, and I'm so happy to see them. I'm really hoping that they're going to be able to keep it up. I'd love to see them be able to sweep a team like Evil Geniuses out of the playoffs. That would be awesome. But who's going to go ahead and take game 3? Is EG going to stay alive, or is Golden Guardians going to make it a quick week here in the LCS? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Golden Guardians. They do take game number 3, and they close out this series with a 3-0 clean sweep over Evil Geniuses. Their split is now over. Their chances of MSI are now 0, but Golden Guardians is going to be moving on. They are alive, and they are in the top 3. What a finish for Golden Guardians. Even if they don't go any further than this, this is an awesome split for GG, and they really proved a lot of people wrong. And so let's go ahead and talk about how they ended up getting there. This was kind of I would say a one-sided game, but at least I think EG tried some things. It's just they tried some things that did not end up going right. A very close level 6 fight, I should say, in the bot lane. That was really the first bit of action in this game, was a level 6 fight around 9-ish minutes into the game that EG actually comes out on top, and it really looked like a good pick for Golden Guardians, who he had just gotten ultimate on the Amumu, so he's going all in with that Amumu ult. They feel like they're able to lock down Inspired, but he's able to get out to his bot lane in time to be able to turn it, and it ends up just being a 2-for-0 in favor of EG. Now, Golden Guardians does get one back on the top side, because they do just punish Someday up on the top side. They try to make top lane's life a lot more difficult, try to split the map there, but for the most part, like, EG is looking okay during the early part of this game. They continue to kind of pressure their advantage. They actually shift up to the top side, try to regain some control for Malphite, and then eventually when the lane swap, they do end up picking off Licorice in the bot lane. But Golden Guardians just have so much better macro that while all of this is happening, while Golden Guardians while EG is spending so much time trying to get Licorice, you know, put down and shut down on that Rumble, Golden Guardians is generating massive gold leads by gaining objectives, taking towers, getting CS waves, and they were able to generate this consistent, like, 1-2k gold lead, legit, just from farming, and it's super impressive stuff, like, just good stuff overall from Golden Guardians, showing they know how to generate gold on the map in ways that aren't just being a Fiesta team that runs it down mid like almost every other NA team. Eventually, we get to the point in the game where Baron is spawning, and Inspired is really looking to get it. Unfortunately, he's on a flank path, and he gets caught out trying to get to the Baron. Golden Guardians is able to punish that. They're able to get on top of him, and the Baron is basically free for GG, and then from that point in the game, it's just over. They get Baron, they get Soul, and there's really no way for EG to fight back. We eventually get to the point where there's a massive ult combo from Kuki on the Amumu, and then Licorice on the Rumble, where it just instantly deletes, like, everybody on the enemy team. You lock down, like, 4 people directly on top of a Rumble ultimate, and it's just doomed. Like, there's no way to win that fight, and that's the combo that you're looking for, and the game is over. They end up being able to push down mid and end it off of that fight directly, but just a really good game overall for Golden Guardians. Really impressed with their drafting. Being able to pull out the Rumble here, I think, is really cool. We've been seeing this pick gain a lot of traction, especially in the LPL with players like Shanji being able to pull it out at a really high level, but obviously, if you can pull it out, it's absolutely going to work out. This is a great pick into something like Malphite, which is definitely counterable in the early game. Obviously, the Silas was banned away, but something like Rumble does really well into it as well, and so, you know, good stuff overall from Licorice. He's going to get my player of the game in this one, surviving so much pressure from Evil Geniuses, who really did want to try and take him down in the mid-game. That was their big strategy, and really never getting a chance to get on top of him other than the one time that they were able to get on top of him was just really impressive stuff. I mean, he's been someone who I think has been a little bit susceptible to being caught out, but he, I think, played this game really well. Obviously, his ultimate in the back half of the game absolutely obliterated underrated Evil Geniuses and was a big reason why they were able to wipe that team fight so quickly. But just generally speaking, a really, really good game, and I would say a pretty good series from Licorice. But player of the series for me, it simply has to be Huhi in the support position. Another phenomenal series. He was player of the series in their previous series, if I'm not mistaken. It may have gone to Stixay, but I think I gave it to Huhi in their series against 100 Thieves. Obviously, you guys will let me know in the comment section below, but he is definitely the player of the series in this one. He was super good on the Amumu. He was great on the Rel, getting back to the roots of his Engage, kind of specialty champions, more off-meta stuff in terms of what is currently being played around the world, but still stuff that can be incredibly effective, especially when the other team is not really respecting it all that much, which I don't think Evil Geniuses really did all that much in these games. And so, good stuff from Huhi. It's good to see this team get back onto comfort. Big credit to Gory. He plays the Cassante at a really high level. Not a lot of mid laners would be able to take him in games 2 and 3 and be able to be as useful as he was, but he was great. Stixay, River, everybody on Golden Guardians had a good series. There was really nothing to complain about. And now they're moving on to face FlyQuest. That's certainly a series that I'm interested in talking about. But before we jump into the preview of that, Evil Geniuses on the other side, your split ends here. Frustrating way to go out. You really, I don't want to take anything away from Golden Guardians by saying this, but you really shouldn't have lost this series. Like, this is not a series that they went into probably expecting to be knocked out here. This is something that I think they really wanted to capitalize and move on with. Like, they probably saw this as a series that they absolutely should be able to win. Unfortunately, they just weren't able to get it done. But that's kind of the story of Evil Geniuses in spring. They have talent, but the consistency is just not there. My dad of the game is going to go to Jojo Pune. I don't think it's entirely his fault, but man, the Lissandra just did not work out in this game. They needed something that could be more proactive, and they certainly needed more damage, and they just weren't getting that from the Lissandra. FBI was really bad this series. He had no games where he really felt like a factor. Vulcan wasn't very good either. I guess nobody on Golden Guardians was shit-talking him on Twitter before the game, but either way, like, you just needed to see that bot lane be better. They were really consistent for EG over the course of the split. I think both of them were all-pro caliber players, and neither of them really showed that in this series. They got outplayed by Stixay and Huhi, and really wasn't all that close. Inspired had moments where I think he looked good, but he also had moments where he looked really bad. He was probably the best performing player on EG, but it's not saying a whole lot. And Someday was just worse than Licorice in the top lane. Not a lot of positives to take away, but this team still is incredibly talented. And moving into summer, I imagine that if you just get them back on the same page, the consistency will return. I don't think you should make any changes to this roster. I think they are too talented to be able to just lose like this, but realistically speaking, this is a team that needs to be in top 3 in order to justify having the players on the team that they have, and if it's not happening, then you need a backup plan, and I just don't know what that is right now. But, EG is out, Golden Guardians is moving on. I'm really excited to preview that, but, now that we've covered all of the games, it's time to get into what I think is going to be happening in the semifinals. But let's not waste too much time. Let's go ahead and preview that semifinal series because there is a lot to talk about. I don't want to spend too much time here because, again, I've already gone over these teams so much in this video already. You probably have a good idea of how both of them play. But let's go ahead and go over the preview for the number 2 seeded FlyQuest taking on the number 6 seeded Golden Guardians. The winner going to MSI. A massive series. And if I would have told you a year ago at the end of spring last year that in a year's time FlyQuest and Golden Guardians would be playing to see who goes to MSI, you would have slapped me in the face, but this is where we're at. An incredibly fun matchup between two incredibly fun teams. I'm really interested to see how this is going to go, but a lot of these lanes are going to be really, really volatile. I think that these could go in a lot of different ways. Let's start our kind of matchup analysis here in the bot lane, talking about Stixay and Huhi taking on Prince and Ayla. Man, if you would have asked me a couple of weeks ago, I would have said Prince and Ayla, no question. Prince is the MVP for me in the regular season. But man, these playoffs have just not really been all that good. That series against Cloud9 really made me worry. Ayla was not very good in that series, and Prince kind of didn't really have a lot of opportunities. The blueprint has kind of been established on how to shut down this FlyQuest bot lane, and Stixay and Huhi have been awesome. Huhi in particular, in my opinion, has just been the best support in North America, and so this could be a really interesting series. I think FlyQuest should be able to take it in terms of talent level, but if Golden Guardians is able to establish early leads in this series, I'm not really going to be all that surprised. And then moving on to the mid lane, you've got Vikla taking on Gory in a mid lane matchup that I think is incredibly explosive. I was surprised at the lack of negative feedback that I got not putting Gory in my all-pro teams. I just think that in comparison to some of the players that were above him, I thought that his consistency wasn't nearly there as much, and I think missing out on some of the first couple of games definitely hurts his case a little bit for me. But the talent of Gory is undeniable. He was pretty good in this series. He wasn't exactly a focal point against Evil Geniuses, and he really hasn't been in recent weeks. That's very much been River in the jungle. That's really been the player that they've wanted to play to the most. And then, of course, Stixay in the bot lane. But if Gory's one of your, like, weak side pieces, like, that's really, really good. Vikla, on the other hand, is a very aggressive player, someone who, if he's able to generate his own leads, is pretty unstoppable. I mean, when we saw him be able to just beat people in the regular season, it was unstoppable. He didn't get nearly enough credit for how good he was in lane and out of lane in the regular season. But again, not a very good series against Cloud9. You're really hoping for a bounce back in form, but I think Vikla is the better player in terms of talent. But if anybody's going to be able to match him in that regard, Gory is certainly up there, and Gory's probably had better form as of recent. But let's also talk about the top lane matchup. Impact taking on Licorice. This is probably the least important matchup of the series. Impact is usually left on an island, and so is Licorice, but both of these players have been relatively subject to opposing teams' pressure. A lot of teams like to gank Licorice. It's been a heavy strategy against Golden Guardians for a long time, and Impact is someone who is definitely susceptible to early ganks, or at least he has been over the past year or so, and so I could definitely see a world in which, either of these teams want to invest a little bit of time in the top lane, but I don't really think it's going to be earth-shattering, whichever way this ends up going. I like Impact more than Licorice, though, I think, pretty consistently. But that's going to lead me to my key matchup of the series. And my key matchup of the series is going to be the jungle matchup here between Spica and River. I actually think these two are going to determine pretty much everything that goes on in this series. Spica does a lot of the heavy lifting in the early game for FlyQuest. Prince, obviously their big late game team fight, mid game carry, but Spica needs to do a good job making sure Prince can get there. If Prince can get there, he can probably win you the game, especially in the current meta that we're in. But Spica did not do a very good job of that in the Cloud9 series, where it just felt like their early games were an absolute disaster. River, on the other hand, has been coming off of some really good series. If he's able to generate an early lead for Golden Guardians, that's going to be massive. It's going to be very similar to what just happened between Cloud9 and FlyQuest. I would generally say that Spica should have the advantage here. In my opinion, he was the best jungler in the regular season. River was really good for Golden Guardians, but Spica theoretically should be better, especially when you look at all these stats. He's basically got River beat in everything. In fact, I do think he's got him beat in everything, which is a pretty good statistic. But again, recency bias would lead me to believe that River is just playing really, really well right now. In my opinion, has been the driving force for them in a lot of their early game plays, whereas Spica, I think, has been an anti-force for FlyQuest in their early game. So it's going to be interesting to see if they can turn that around. If we're getting regular season Spica, FlyQuest is probably going to be able to take this series relatively easily. If we're getting regular season River, FlyQuest will be able to take it. But if it's the opposite, if we get playoff versions of both of these players, I don't know, River's going to make this a really, really interesting one. I'm really excited to see what's going to happen. And if I had to predict, I'm going to predict FlyQuest. I know some people aren't going to want to hear that, but I think FlyQuest is probably going to be able to get the job done here, though I have doubted Golden Guardians up until this point. I predicted them to lose against 100 Thieves. I predicted them to lose against Evil Geniuses, and so they've already denied me twice. Why not a third time? I mean, I would really, really love to see it, but I'm going to predict Fly 3-1, Fly 3-2 in this one. I think the spread is relatively kind to Golden Guardians, but FlyQuest should be the better team, and they should be able to take care of business in this one. But it's going to be a fun series. Both of these teams are a lot of fun to watch, and I'm very much looking forward to it. All right, but that is going to do it for my LCS Round 2 overview and analysis of both series, upper and lower bracket. Of course, you'll see the updated bracket on the screen now, but I really do hope you guys are excited. Next video is actually not going to be the semifinals. Usually I like to break up the semifinals and the finals. I usually like to do both of those videos separately, but it's just not going to be possible for me because I'm going to be there. I'm going to be at LCS semis and finals live. I'm going to be watching these games live, so I'm going to have some good analysis. I'm going to be taking some good notes, but unfortunately that means that both of those series are going to be combined into one video. I hope you guys can understand that, but I'm really excited to get to see that live. But of course, if you enjoyed this video in particular and the analysis that I gave, let me know down in the comment section below. What do you guys think of the video? What do you like of the style? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Let me know. Of course, if you did enjoy it, hit that like button. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying these videos. Also helps get this out to a lot more people, which I'm really appreciative of. Of course, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. It really does mean a lot to me, but also I'm putting out a freaking ton of content over the course of the next month or so. I've been uploading for about, 17 days in a row. I think I'm close to 33, which is the amount of days I'm posting in a row for playoffs. I cover every single region or every single major region and the NACL on this channel, and so it's been a lot of fun, but I really do hope you guys hit that subscribe button if you are interested in LoL esports content. This is basically a nice mecca to get all of that broken down into nice little videos, and of course I hope you guys are enjoying it. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you're all having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.